it rains. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
A cabinet resignation, the first of this Prime Minister's tenure. What does this say about Rishi Sunak's judgment, and indeed how rocky or otherwise this premiership is to come? That and the state of the polls. Also, only a week until that big fiscal statement next Thursday. We'll explore it all on The Briefing after the headlines.
A very good morning to you. 9:31, I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Results for the US midterms are being declared this morning, with some states still too close to call. If the Democrats lose either the House or the Senate, well, that would enable the Republicans to limit President Joe Biden's ability to pass laws. Results out so far show that Republicans are on course to gain control of the House of Representatives. The race for the Senate is currently on a knife edge. It could be days before the final results are announced due to the high number of postal votes. Rishi Sunak will likely be challenged in the Commons today during Prime Minister's questions after the Cabinet Minister, Sir Gavin Williamson, resigned last night. Sir Gavin said allegations of bullying and his conduct are becoming a distraction to the good work of government. The MP left his post after further allegations emerged last night. Sir Gavin denies any wrongdoing. The Prime Minister will face questions during PMQs this afternoon over his decision to make Sir Gavin a minister, despite being aware of a complaint against him. The NATO chief, Jens Stoltenberg, will visit number 10 Downing Street later, the first international leader since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. The meeting's been seen as a sign of how important Mr Sunak views the role of NATO security as Russia's war in Ukraine continues. The Royal College of Nursing is expected to announce its first national strike action in its 106-year history. The union's 300,000 members were urged to vote for industrial action in a dispute over pay. The results are expected today. The government said its contingency plans for dealing with the action. A police officer has been injured after responding to a climate protest on the M25 this morning. Essex Police said there was a collision between a motorbike and two lorries in a rolling roadblock that had been imposed because of an activist on the motorway. This is the third day of action on the UK's busiest motorway. Just Stop Oil say around 10 of its supporters climbed onto overhead gantries in multiple locations on the M25 this morning. 2 arrests have been made. We're on your TV, we're online and your DAB Plus radio. It's GB News. Now let's head back to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Well, Gavin Williamson has resigned. In a letter to the Prime Minister last night, he tendered his resignation following numerous allegations of bullying. He stated that he had become a distraction for the government. It's the third time that the former Chief Whip has left a government role in 3 years, under the supervision of 3 separate Prime Ministers. But how will this feed into perceptions of our new Prime Minister? Today, we'll explore the state of the opinion polls, taking the temperature of the nation. And as the Chancellor's autumn statement looms, it's just 1 week away. What will we expect? Well, Liam Halligan has been speaking to the former Brexit Secretary, Lord Frost. We'll explore that conversation in depth. And in the United States, voters have been going to the polls. The Republicans look set to take the House of Representatives, but are underperforming in the Senate, which is resting on a knife edge. Pennsylvania went Democrat, meaning the seismic red wave promised by the Republicans has not been as much of a Titanic success as had been trumpeted. Perhaps the story of Trump-era Republicans is expectation management has not been where it should be. Well, let's return to this side of the Atlantic now and kick off by taking the temperature of the nation. Let's join the pollster Joe Twyman, the founder and director of Delta Poll. Thank you for making the time this morning. It's been, of course, not enough time to see if polls have shifted with regard to the Gavin Williamson story. But just as a background, how is Rishi Sunak doing? At the start of this week, where were things set?
Well, the most recent poll that here at Delta Poll we have published shows that the Conservatives have an 18-point lead over over Labour. Sorry, excuse me. Labour have an 18-point lead over the Conservatives, and that's a slight contraction on where they have been in recent polling, suggesting that Rishi Sunak is performing better than Liz Truss. We know that certainly from the leadership ratings. He's doing a lot better than she was on that personal rating, but also the gap between Conservative and Labour has closed under his leadership. But it's still a large gap for the Labour Party, and the Conservatives have some way to go before that is closed.
Yes, an absolutely enormous gap that in normal times we would be commenting upon as something that was in a pretty dire position for the Tory party. But what about the particulars in terms of how Rishi Sunak is perceived as an individual? Clearly, a lot of the political attacks on judgment will be trying to change public perceptions in terms of how Rishi Sunak is seen. Is he seen as more competent?
Well, what I would say at the moment is that actually most people are still making up their mind. And in some cases, they are giving him the benefit of the doubt. And in many cases, indeed, he benefits from being compared to Liz Truss. He's certainly seen as more competent than her. He's certainly seen as a safer pair of hands. But as stories such as Gavin Williamson's resignation start to gain momentum, I think we could potentially see a change in that perception, and indeed it may influence those people who don't yet know into coming down one side or the other. I think this particular story is an interesting one, but a relatively minor one. I think the issues and stories around Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, are potentially more damaging because Gavin Williamson was a relatively minor person in cabinet. He was minister without portfolio. Most people, perhaps even Gavin Williamson included, don't know exactly what that means, and so that's less of a major issue. But it still all helps feed these narratives about whether Rishi Sunak is really a competent, safe pair of hands, or whether he's just doing better than Liz Truss.
And how much time have people really had to make up their minds? I remember reading in, I think it was the Times last week, of all of these different attributes that Rishi Sunak has, or indeed facts about him. I think it was Philip Cowley, the academic, who asked the question of people, facts about Rishi Sunak. You know, was he wealthy? Did he go to this particular school? Did he vote Remain or Leave? And on some of those issues, the British public seemed fairly confused. A lot of people who voted Leave didn't necessarily realise that Rishi Sunak himself voted Leave. Is he particularly presenting himself as something more palatable, perhaps what we might call towards the blue wall, rather than the red wall?
It's always worth keeping in mind that the average person in the street and the 50% of people less engaged in the average person in the street really isn't paying that much attention to politics. In the summer, when the previous leadership election ran, only 2/3 of people said that they would even recognise Rishi Sunak if they passed him in the street. So that's even a third of people not knowing what he looks like, let alone what his positions were on various different subjects, or indeed much about his background. And so, by virtue of the fact that he's Prime Minister, inevitably people know more about him over time. But it does take time. And I think it's too early to judge whether he particularly appeals to one set of Conservative voters or another, because he very much is a blank sheet of paper at the moment in public opinion terms. Now, that can be a good thing, because it means that you do have the potential, at least, to appeal to certain groups, certain communities, and to win people over. But it can also be a bad thing that people simply don't pay attention to you, and you're unable to cut through to get your points across and build a favourable narrative around your leadership.
Well, speaking of blank sheets of paper, let's turn our view to the leader of the opposition, who has been criticised, I suppose, similarly to Rishi Sunak, as having multiple positions on multiple issues over the years. How do people see the Labour Party leader right now, as opposed to the Labour Party's brand?
Keir Starmer is doing relatively well, certainly by historical standards. He's consistently in positive territory when it comes to whether people think he's doing a good or bad job. In other words, more people think he's doing a good job than a bad job. And that may seem like a low bar, but as I say, by historical standards, that's actually doing quite well. But again, he is a relatively unknown quantity. Now, part of that is to do with the fact that for a good period of time during the early stages of his leadership, it was the height of the COVID pandemic, and all attention, quite understandably, was on the government and government ministers. But since we've seen that period of time end, he has started to resonate more with the public, and he is doing well, as indeed is the Labour Party more generally. The question, of course, for him is, can this be sustained, and how will he perform compared to Rishi Sunak? So not just in absolute terms, but relative terms as well. At the moment, it's pretty much neck and neck. Some polls have Starmer ahead, some polls have Sunak ahead. But as I say, I think that's more of a reflection of at times wishful thinking around both candidates, rather than actually making a considered view about either one.
Well, in that context of comparing the two men, it's not long before we'll see them go head-to-head at midday today at Prime Minister's Questions. But for now, Joe Twyman, founder and director of Delta Poll, thank you very much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Interesting stuff there. Another big issue, though, outside of the polls, is, of course, the economy. And Lord Frost has said he fears that the government is returning to George Osborne-style austerity, and that raising taxes into recession, when interest rates are rising too, poses a real risk of a vicious economic spiral. He's been speaking exclusively to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. The former Brexit secretary also warned that the net zero 2050 agenda, championed at COP26 and 27, is, quote, unrealistic. Well, I'm delighted to say that Liam Halligan joins us now for more of this exclusive interview with On the Money. So, Liam, what was the biggest standout takeaway of your conversation with Lord Frost?
Well, Lord Frost, the former Brexit secretary, he wanted to talk mainly about COP27 and the net zero agenda. He's just become a trustee of an organisation called the Global Warming Policy Foundation. GWPF and Lord Frost say there is man-made climate change. We do need to move away from fossil fuels. But Lord Frost in particular is concerned about the pace at which we're doing that. And when I spoke to him exclusively for GB News, he told me, Tom, in this first clip, that he thought this net zero by 2050 agenda was unrealistic. Here he is.
I'm doubtful, I've got to say. I don't think that rushing at the 2050 deadline as we have it in the UK and Europe is necessarily going to work. I don't think the technologies are quite ripe yet. It's too easy to say all we need to do is have more wind farms and more solar until we get the ability to store power, until the intermittency problem is solved, really properly solved. I struggle to see that these technologies are going to do everything we want and that they'll be useful in more than a marginal way. I think the right way of going at this is gas to nuclear and lots of research into other possibilities. And I don't know whether that is consistent with 2050. I'm doubtful.
Interesting stuff there. What did he make particularly of a big row that's been happening in the Commons that was one of the big rows under Liz Truss, the issue of British natural shale gas and whether or not we should extract it ourselves?
Well, Lord Frost linked this issue of fracking. Of course, Rishi Sunak has reaffirmed the moratorium on fracking, banning fracking within the UK, even though lots of companies have invested heavily in preparing wells to be extract gas, shale gas using fracking. Lord Frost linked it to that announcement that the UK is going to rely increasingly on LNG, liquefied natural gas, being exported from the US in ships, sailed 3,000 miles across the Atlantic and then turned back from liquid into gas.
How very green.
Extremely expensive and carbon-heavy process. And Lord Frost said he wants to at least try fracking to see if it works. He says it isn't an open and a shut case, but he says it has to be worth trying. And he pointed to a certain hypocrisy on the part of the government to be championing the idea of fracked US shale gas while banning fracked shale gas here in the UK. Here he is.
I'm personally in favour of at least trying fracking and seeing if we can do that. And I think there's a degree of hypocrisy in those who won't do fracking in the UK but are perfectly happy to import large quantities of fracked gas from the US or Qatar or wherever else. I think it is just a bit kind of unreasonable to look at it in that way. We should be responsible for our own security of supply as far as we possibly can.
And so, looking at the economy in the round, Lord Frost has been someone that has really criticised the historically high tax burden that we have in this country. Did he elaborate on that?
He did. Lord Frost, and he speaks for a lot of people on the Conservative backbenches in the Commons. He, of course, is in the upper house, the House of Lords. He's a small state kind of guy. He's alarmed, like a lot of Conservatives are, that we're already at a 70-year high in terms of our tax burden. The share of the economy taken up by tax is heading for 36.5% of GDP, the highest since Clement Attlee, consistently. And yet, all the signs are that when the autumn statement comes out on Thursday, a week tomorrow, then that tax burden is going to go up even more. And in the final clip we'll play for now, Tom, when I asked Lord Frost about that autumn statement, he said that his concern with the economy on the brink of recession, as interest rates are rising, he said if we increase taxes too much, that will slow the economy down and make the fiscal situation even worse, unleashing what he called a vicious spiral.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real risk raising taxes into a recession, especially when interest rates, so monetary policy is getting tighter as well. There are very few examples, if any, in the world of countries that have consolidated their way into growing. What tends to happen more is budgetary consolidation begins to slow growth, crush the economy. You therefore have to consolidate even further, and you get onto a vicious cycle. And some of the Eurozone countries have got into that at times.
Do you think we're in a danger
of
a vicious downward spiral?
I mean, I don't know yet. I think you just got to be cautious when it's clear that economic conditions are getting worse, that we're not making our own life more difficult.
Well, they're just a few clips, Tom, from what was a pretty sort of thorough journalistic encounter. I tried to do all my interviews in depth, and viewers and listeners of GB News can catch a full 15-minute version of that interview on my Money Talks podcast, on the GB News YouTube channel, the GB News app, and our Facebook channels as well.
Really, really interesting. I do really like these long-form interviews. You really get into the depth
of everything. And I think the public likes them. I think there's not nearly enough long-form interviewing going on in the UK at the moment. It's all about 20-second sound bites.
Well, speaking of sound bites, in our next 20 seconds, Liam, what can we expect next Thursday? There is a monumental task from the Chancellor to set out the path of the country for the medium term. What are you expecting?
Well, we're expecting some pretty blood-curdling forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Of course, there were no OBR forecasts during the mini-budget, and that was part of the reason that the markets kind of spasmed to some degree. But it's clear that taxes are going to go up, even if they're stealth taxes, that is freezing tax thresholds. They've already been frozen until 2026, Rishi Sunak said last spring when he was the former Chancellor, and they could easily be frozen to 2028. That drags more and more people who are on pretty middle incomes into the upper tax bracket, paying 40% tax rather than 20%. It's a big difference. Inheritance tax thresholds, they've been frozen since 2009. Since 2009, so as house prices go up, more and more people, again, with very modest homes that they've paid for out of their post-tax income on a mortgage for 25 years, working all their lives, if they want to leave that house to their kids...
That'll be taxed all over again.
Very modest houses will be taxed above £325,000 for each person, which isn't a particularly expensive house. It's lower. For average. It's actually lower than the average house, believe it or not. The average house is about £328,000 at the moment. So I do think there's a kind of the drum beats from the sort of media and political commentary. Of course we've got to raise taxes. Of course we've got to raise taxes. Is it really a good idea to raise corporation tax from 19 to 25% when so many firms, particularly small firms, have been hammered during lockdown? Rishi Sunak's talking a good game on tax. I think when people actually see what is happening, however stealthily Gordon Brown style he tries to introduce these tax rises, I think there's going to be a backlash.
And ultimately that OBR document will show us the tax burden at the end of it all, and that may
well be guess. It's all a guess. That's the thing. These are forecasts, and forecasts are not destiny.
Well, Liam,
take that from an economist.
We will join you again next week as we get closer to this monumental event in the Commons. But of course, before then, there are other events in the House of Commons. Indeed, Prime Minister's Questions is starting at midday today. Let's preview it now with Tony Diver, the Whitehall correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. And Tony, thank you for joining us this morning. If you were Sir Keir Starmer, what would you ask the Prime Minister?
Well, I think I'd be asking almost all 6 of my questions on Gavin Williamson, wouldn't you? I mean, the fact that Rishi Sunak has lost one of his cabinet ministers, 2 weeks into his premiership, and he's had to do it because of historic allegations about bullying, which Gavin Williamson denies, I think is probably the first thing that I would be asking today. And Labour came out pretty strongly last night condemning Gavin Williamson, saying that he shouldn't take any money as a severance payoff, and all of those various other arguments that we hear from Labour about government propriety and honesty at the heart of government. So I think I would start with that, and then I would start moving on to the budget. And of course, we know we've got, as you've just been talking about with Liam, we've got the autumn statement coming up soon. I would be looking at that, looking at the various different stories that have been trailed throughout the media, some in this morning's Telegraph, others elsewhere, about those increases in taxes. And I would be sort of putting it to the Chancellor, but to the Prime Minister, former Chancellor, that actually it was on his watch that a lot of this stuff went wrong.
It's interesting, however, how the Labour Party focused yesterday not on Gavin Williamson, but on Suella Braverman. They used their opposition day in the House of Commons to push a motion on the Home Secretary. They weren't really talking that much about Gavin Williamson. Has that story now sort of been pushed to the sidelines, given the Gavin Williamson situation?
Well, I think that story will rumble on only because Suella Braverman remains in government and Gavin Williamson doesn't, right? And the migrant crisis isn't going to get any better very quickly. There are still issues around detention centres. There are news stories coming out every day about what's going on in those centres and how the government's dealing with it. We also know that it's costing something like £7 million a day in hotel fees. So, I mean, I do think the migrant crisis and the issues surrounding Suella Braverman are a story that is going to keep rolling. Fundamentally, the issue with Gavin Williamson was not a policy issue. It wasn't about a crisis at the heart of government, something that had gone wrong, a ministerial cock-up. It wasn't about anything to do with that. It was about something he'd done in the past. It was historic allegations and the way that he'd behaved during the Conservative leadership race. So, no, I think actually that migrant story and the story of Suella Braverman will continue, whether or not she remains in post. I think it's something that the country and taxpayers feel they probably have a right to know about.
And fundamentally, what does the departure of Gavin Williamson mean for the unity of this government? Clearly, the reason he was included in cabinet is as some sort of mover, shaker, enforcer, someone able to get legislation through. With that gone, does this majority government look slightly more wobbly?
Well, I suppose that's not his explicit job, is it? He wasn't the chief whip, but yeah, we expected that he would have some sort of role like that. The actual role that he was given, the Geospatial Commission he was in charge of in the Cabinet Office, I mean, it seemed to me, at least, as if he was given a sort of list of things that no one else really wanted to do as an excuse to give him a job in the Cabinet, and actually his job was going to be much more sort of soft power, soft politics across the party, doing that sort of managerial role, as you say. I think the big concern for Rishi Sunak is that we know that this guy's a bit of an operator. We know that he's able to get support behind him. We know that he's a experienced politician and you know, cut his teeth in the Theresa May years. He was the guy that was keeping the deal, confidence and supply deal with the DUP hanging together.
Yes.
So, you know, he knows how to straddle an uneasy coalition. Does Rishi Sunak now...
Well, Tony, I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We've run to the end of the programme, but really fascinating stuff with Gavin Williamson's role. As we were saying, the end of the programme is nigh. Up next, it's Bev Turner. But thank you for joining me, and join me again at 9:30 tomorrow.
Hello, very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern. Further showers today, especially in the west, once again, just like yesterday. But there'll be a better chance of some sunny spells and some longer-lasting drier interludes compared with the last couple of days. The weather is certainly changeable at the moment. That's because we've got all these westerlies coming in from the Atlantic, low pressure in charge, and various weather fronts at play. But actually, these old fronts are not causing too many problems, I think. They're mostly showery features. And as we start off the day, northern England, parts of Wales in particular, will be subject to quite a number of showers, some more prolonged rain in places. By the time we get to the afternoon, though, there'll be a better chance of gaps between the showers, some sunny spells, and some places might not see that many showers, certainly compared with the last couple of days. 15 Celsius in the south, 12 Celsius for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, North Wales, with less of a gusty wind compared with the last couple of days, so that might help make it feel a bit more pleasant where we managed to dodge the showers. All change, though, later in the day because the showers ease away, but thicker clouds arrive from the north and the west, and as a result, we're going to see some light outbreaks of rain over western hills, some more persistent rain for parts of northern and northwest Scotland. But with the breeze picking up from the southwest, well, that's a mild direction, and as a result, temperatures are rising. It's a mild start to Thursday. And for southeastern areas in particular, it's a mostly dry day. There'll be some breaks with that cloud, some sunshine coming through. However, the cloud will always be thickest towards the west and the northwest. We'll see some light outbreaks of rain over the hills and some more persistent wet weather for the northwest of Scotland. It's a breezy day, but actually, with that breeze coming from the southwest, it is going to be milder once again, 16 Celsius in the south or even 17 Celsius. And that trend continues through Friday and the weekend. Unsettled in the northwest, drier in the southeast, but very mild for all of us.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.